I can do it in Polish if you want. No, I'm just kidding. So, hi everyone. I'm here today to talk about content and language. And I'm going to be specifically focusing on something I like to call content identity. Now, this is a little bit different than the ways that we're used to creating content, which is to have a demand for a web page or an ebook or something online that we need, someone has to write it, and then go and deliver it. And today I want to introduce a little bit of a different approach to content creation, and that is to find word choices and find phrases that correctly reflect our brand's identity, and then build a content platform out of just a few word choices. So instead of going from one piece of small content, we're starting with this big idea that our brands have identity, and if we repeat those identities, we can create a whole ecosystem of content from it. So who am I? I'm Brenden. I work for web development and technology companies, as Martin said, and I primarily work with people who aren't necessarily considered content creators. So these are people like developers or financial executives or even some product owners and project managers who aren't super close to the content. And all of these people have the ability nowadays to be content creators. If you think of developers who write blogs, sorry. Let me grab some water too, because if you think of developers who write code and write successful blogs, these are people in all of our companies and all of our brands that have the potential to generate new content and engage audiences. And sometimes they're like unexpected people, right? So you wouldn't think of a CFO being a content creator, but today they are. And so solidifying a very singular identity in our companies and in our language is really important to not only create this content, but to empower everyone within our organization to contribute to content management. So I've structured this talk into 3 sections. The first is content identity. We'll look at why and how developing this is so effective. I'll show you some examples that many top brands are kind of playing with this concept. And I also want to give you the tools to start doing it on your own. And then we'll dive into a little bit of content architecture. This is just the guts and the organizational part of content management. Once we've done the identity work, then we can begin to structure and build the kinds of different content things that we're looking for. And then I'll quickly touch on content delivery. And this is like where most people actually start in the process, right here at the bottom. And we're going to rethink this a little bit. So how many of you here have ever watched the American television show The Office? Cool, quite a bit. So this was a graphic that was recently posted on Reddit, and it's really interesting because it shows the top 8 most distinguished keywords from each character throughout 9 seasons of the show airing. Okay, so it's just 9 words that each character said the most and the most uniquely throughout the show. Let's dig into it. There was actually a formula that he used for this data analysis. And on the left-hand side, you have basically something about how unique it is, or is it? No, how frequent it is. So he compared how many times one character said it to all of the other characters. And then he multiplied it by how frequent it was. So how many times was it said throughout the show? And what you're left with are these 8 to 9 words. And what's really cool, if you have watched the show, is that you can tell what these characters are like. You get a really complete picture of each character just from 8 words. And if you haven't watched the show, one of my favorite characters is Angela. She's an accountant in the office, and she's kind of a mean, deranged cat lady. Okay, and so of course her keywords, her number 1 is cat. Sprinkles and Bandit are the cat's names. And of course pet is also in there. So literally half of her identity is a cat lady in this show for 9 years, right? And there's another funny one, which is Senator. She's very proud to be dating a senator, but he turns out to be gay, and all the other characters are in on it, they know, except for her because she's a bit disconnected from reality, you know? She's a cat lady. And so what this means is that strong character identity can emerge just from a few select words, our word choices that we use to identify whether maybe characters or our brand or whatever thing that we're talking about. And also, we want to remember that identities don't change in good storytelling. Maybe a character's identity is challenged or they grow in some ways, but there are certain parts of a core character whose identities don't shift. And that's the kind of thing we're looking for in our brand language. Okay, so we're actually already familiar with this kind of concept through visual identity, right? I've pulled a couple logos here, just randomly off the top of my head. You have the Mozilla Firefox logo, which is pretty, it has a lot of elements going on. It's colorful and vibrant, which represents, modern youth and fun. It has the globe in the background, which is about connectivity, bringing the world together. And then you have the fox, which represents agility and speed and cunning and innovation. And then you also have probably the most recognized logo on the planet, which is the Nike logo, maybe second to the Mickey Mouse symbol. But this signifies movement and activity, right? And it references back to Greek mythology. And then, of course, the Olympics visual gives us this idea of unity, diversity with the different colors, and of the 5 continents coming together for this one event. So how do we bring this kind of identity into language? Because visuals are really easy, right? They're universal. So everyone anywhere can kind of pick up the same messages from these. But language is not universal, and language is very difficult and complex. But we can do it. So one brand that does this on a very large scale is Microsoft. And this is the keyword digital transformation at Microsoft. And I've had the opportunity to work on this and contribute to this sort of giant content behemoth, you could call it. And this is a very exaggerated example. I'm not expecting us to implement, the scope of what I'll be talking about here. So these are Microsoft web pages. These are places that they're talking to their customers and to their audiences. And on every single web page, you'll find the words digital transformation. No breaks in between, nothing like redone, right? It's just digital transformation. And you can see here on this slide, it's about marketing, it's their partner network, their cloud business analytics platform always talks about digital transformation. Their social initiatives, the things that they do to promote community and build social engagement, those are also about digitally transforming society. And then you also have things like gas and water, resource planning. It's just everywhere. And we see it in media coverage as well. So these are all very recent articles. I think these are within the last 48 hours. And they all refer somehow to a Microsoft technology, or at the bottom here, there's I think she's a content manager, talking about digital transformation. And it gets to the point where people notice this kind of language identity. And you get posts like this, which are people who say, I'm sick and tired of it, right? So this post was written in 2014. I don't know if you can see the date, right? And so people were already sick of this kind of like bombardment of language coming at them back, I don't know how, was 4 years ago, right? And remember, all of the articles and those websites I just pulled, you can go find them today on the website. So the first thing that I want to offer, it's sort of a tool, is that you start using Google News search. And I can't stress like this enough, especially for people who are product owners and content creators, and especially for people who are non-native English speakers. Google News Search is really helpful because it contains all of the latest content and sort of the most relevant content that's being released right now on the web. And even if you don't care about what the article says, you can find how people are talking about it. And these are trusted writers, right? So a lot of these are, half of these are blogs, half of them are editorial. So Forbes magazine, Washington Post, things like that. And you'll be able to quickly discover how another brand is talking about your industry or your product or whatever you are interested in. So you'll notice that my talk on the paper is not originally called content identity. It's something that I discovered while I was going through content management. I was thinking maybe I'll talk about content management or how to organize content. But something really struck me about identity. And I found it through just a simple Google News search. It's this little tab, 2 tabs to the right of where we all exist every day, which is Google search. But it collects blogs and content marketing pieces. And of course, you can do different things like filtering results from blogs or reporting sources. You can sort by date or relevance. And the reason why this kind of stuff is so important, and you can see it in the screen, is that this is the kind of stuff that you'll be producing. Ultimately, this is the kind of content that you'll be making, and it will hopefully show up here. And so you need to see into like what everyone else is doing. And you can do it really quickly through Google News. The second way that we're going to start collecting words and phrases is through something I really like to use, which is a Power Thesaurus. powerthesaurus.org. I can't tell you how many times a Polish colleague comes to me and asks me for a word like, what is this? What is another word for this? And like 80% of the time, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. You know, I'm a native English speaker, not like a native dictionary. So I personally need a tool like this. And this is a really great one because you can do all the nice things that I've listed out here. This is what it looks like when you get to the site. And let me go back. What's really cool is that it's crowdsourced. So you can kind of upvote and downvote the synonyms and antonyms. And it's created by writers. And so there's a little bit more trust and community going on here than you would find in like a Google, dictionary or something like that. You'd find everything that you could in a regular thesaurus, so synonyms, antonyms. You can narrow down what you're looking for. You can expand it. You can go by different parts of speech. And you'll notice that there's this list on the left-hand side that says expressions and idioms. And that's really helpful, especially for non-native English speakers, to find new ways of talking about something or find new, discover phrases that they may not have used before. Or maybe they see something and they can search for it and all these different expressions and idioms will come up. And then there's also topics. So if you want to search like a very specific thing, you can see what other topics people have created and learn different words that way. So originally, content identity was a phrase I came up with while preparing this talk. And I'm going to show you just a little exercise of why I've showed you Google News and why I've showed you Power Thesaurus. Before I thought maybe content marketing, but when I searched for content identity because I had found that language that I liked, I realized in the news sources no one was really talking about it. Like, these are just news things that have nothing to do with content marketing or creation. And then I went back to Google search to just see if content identity was even a thing. And sure enough, back in 2014 and 2012, some people were talking about it. So I had the idea that, okay, this hasn't been talked about recently, and it's sort of old enough that if I produce this content, I'll be kind of unique and relevant, right? And so jumping forward for the sake of time, these are some keywords that I picked up while trying to create examples for this talk. Content identity. Integrity was something I really liked from the previous Power Thesaurus slide. And then also a couple of things which really felt good to me and really felt like I could place into my content as core identity values, which I even wrote core values. So now I have all of these like base words and pieces that I think are interesting, and they actually reflect my brand's identity and what I'm going for. So I can begin to segment my audience and build a content grid. And this is basically just identifying who the key audience members are, the key stakeholders, your customer segmentation, your audience segmentation, whatever you want to call it. So perhaps I want to talk to CMOs, right? So I've written that on my content grid. And perhaps I want to talk specifically to developers. So I've written that. And what I've come up with using those keywords is that now I have content that I can create for them. And maybe my brand will sort of, these things in orange are sort of big ideas. They're not necessarily titles of articles, right? So for chief marketing officers, for instance, I want to identify building digital trust and focus on content identity marketing, because this is different from content marketing, right? I've sort of made it my own. And so now I go to Google News and I say, what are CMOs reading and what are they being advised to do by other writers, right? So you'll see here, these are lots of different content stories about how CMOs can be better or why your content marketing strategy is short-sighted. And from this, I can begin to put together a very simplified version of a content grid. This is just for an exercise. The idea is that once you've identified your core words and your core piece of messaging, you can begin to find ways to create content out of that one singular message. And finally, I have this piece of content that I want to write about, right? Like I have all these topics that I would like to deliver to CMOs. And great, now I can give this to a writer. Now I can talk to my developers and see if they have anything to say to my audience. And I have now the tools to discover how to talk about it. So I have core language identity. And one very quick thing about content delivery that I want to cover is about reusing and recycling this content once I've created the identity, and then once I've created these channels for it to flow through. Now delivery is just a natural part of what I'm doing. So I've created an article, and I can ask my sales manager to write a short LinkedIn post, maybe 200 words, and then link that main article that I wrote for CMOs back at the bottom. And then I can ask a salesperson to create a presentation, a really quick one on LinkedIn slides, which are like 3 images. And then I can also ask them to identify or link back to that article. And to bring it all together, I really want to stress that building a content identity, much like discovering a self-identity, is about building confidence. So confidence that other people in your sphere can talk about the products and the services that you're creating in the exact same ways together as a unit. And that focusing on those key words means that you have a very solid platform for coming together to describe that identity. And ultimately, this is a platform about not making mistakes or not being scared to make mistakes. Because once you have a really strong character identity, much like the characters from The Office, you're able to put content out there. You're able to write posts with maybe a couple grammar errors. You're able to miss a couple deadlines, or maybe you hire a writer and the content is not exactly what you were looking for. But with a core brand identity and the language to support that, ultimately, those mistakes are sort of absorbed by your brand's new identity. And yeah, that's it. That's all I have. Thank you.